Hello, my name is Alex, and I am doing a podcast today. This is for a final exam for my science class, and I am currently an elementary ed major. So I'm just going to be sharing some ideas with you today over inquiry learning. Specifically, the question of the day is, what do we mean by hands-on, minds-on learning? And so my personal belief is that hands-on, minds-on learning is allowing your students to have a moment of connection between their brain and their body. And this needs to happen for there to be a meaning-making learning experience and just also the connections for them from the content they're learning to real life. Some of the background, some of the resources that I've gotten, one is from a website called learner.org, and the article that I read was called Learning Science Through Inquiry, and there was about 4 different authors, and a lot of the things that they had to say were very similar to my personal belief. One of the things they said is that students are learning through their 5 senses, and that is what hands-on, minds-on learning means, and it is encouraging the students to be engaged, to ask questions, and to conduct research, which is completely true because when they are having hands-on learning, they are asking further questions. They might take so for example, if we're learning about the solar system and we have an example of the solar system and different planets in front of them, and maybe they've seen the pictures online and they kind of know what Mars might look like, or they kind of might know what the Earth looks like, but they've never physically held an example, then when you're allowing them to, they're able to kind of make that connection and be like, whoa, Earth really is a sphere, and I know this is a sphere because such and such. And so it allows those engagements between two content areas. So not only are they learning about science, but they're able to connect that to their knowledge in math even. And it also allows them to question further, like, I wonder why the Earth is like this. I wonder why the planets are like this, and then they can conduct research based off of those questions. A direct quote that I really liked from this article as well was that in an inquiry-based classroom, students aren't waiting for the teacher or someone else to provide an answer. Instead, they're actively seeking solutions, designing investigations, and asking new questions. Students quickly see the cycle of learning, and that learning has cycles. Students learn to think and problem solve. They also learn that there is no place or one resource for answers, but many tools are useful for exploring problems. Students actively involved in making observations, collecting and analyzing information, synthesizing information, and drawing conclusions are developing useful problem-solving skills. These skills can be applied to future need-to-know situations that students will encounter both at school and work. So that was a long, direct quote, but basically, in short, it's talking that the teacher is not just the teacher. They're not the sole source of information. Actually, they're the opposite. They become the learner as well, and the students become the teacher and the learner. So they are also in charge of their learning when it becomes hands-on, because they are allowing themselves to go further, and the educator is more of a facilitator and more of a partner in the learning, and not just the one that is up there in front and kind of making the learning the only thing that's they're the only one that the students are learning from. So to further my research, I decided to try an article off of a site called wildlifehc.org. The article is called Hands-On Means Minds-On. And this one was very similar to all of the things that I've said, but I will say that this direct quote right here just really kind of gave me an aha moment. It says, this kind of active learning helps you engage more deeply with the information or skill at hand. Hands-on learning stimulates all the senses, allowing you to become fully immersed in the experience and activating more parts of the brain. This makes it easier to recall and synthesize what was learned, as demonstrated in this author, her last name Beatty, related to 2009 studies that found that doodling helped participants better remember the information conveyed during a lecture and enhance the enjoyment and engagement with the material. So a lot of times we talk about in science, you think of hands-on learning, you think of labs, and you think of, oh yeah, I remember working with that. And for me, I remember a lot of things in science because I did have really great hands-on learning experiences, and I think that's why, because I was allowed the time to connect that to my body and to my mind. And there's been significant research on that showing that when your body is allowed to take a moment to respond and to interact with the content that you're learning, it is allowing to make more brain connections. More of your brain is working. And I talk about that later on in the next article that I read. This was actually off of Scholastic. It says that the more parts of your brain you use, the more likely you are to retain information. And this is from Judy Dodge, who is the author of 25 Quick Formative Assessments for a Differentiated Classroom. So again, it's going back to the hands-on, minds-on is just allowing the brain to be challenged and allowing it to grow in many different ways, because you're able to give these examples for the students to just kind of play around with and to learn from, to learn real-world applications. And they're also able to learn on multiple levels. So they're using their visual, auditory, tactile, kinesthetic, and social learning skills and styles, so that also allows your classroom to be benefited for your many different learners, which I think is great and very helpful. So in my last article that I really enjoyed was also still on Scholastic, and they gave some tips on providing a hands-on, minds-on classroom, and just some things that they suggested that you have. So the following are those tips. It says provide self-check materials. So you not only are giving the students the assessment, which is the next point, but you're giving them the opportunity to self-check that. That goes back to the very first article, that you're allowing the students to be in charge of their learning. You're allowing the students the chance to be the teachers and the learners. And so by allowing those self-check materials, they're able to do that, and they don't have to rely so much on you to be the resource. And so they're learning, and they're able to check themselves. Keep kids moving. I love this one. It's so important on your hands-on learning to have multiple different levels and also multiple different things. So right now I'm thinking of like workstations. You have very different hands-on experiences, and some stations are going to have more to do, and some stations are not going to have just as much content or activities. So it's really important that you keep them moving and you keep them engaged, and just really enjoying that learning. Moving the materials was the next tip. And this one I thought was really interesting. When you're having hands-on learning in the classroom, especially for science, they suggest that you should move the materials constantly. So not constantly, but like at a rapid rate for your students to have differentiation. So you're not always putting hands-on in the same area. You're kind of moving it around the classroom and allowing that authentic aesthetic learning to happen. I liked this one. It says group by interest. So, some of your students are going to like certain aspects of science and some of them are not. And some of them are going to like some of the, I said some a lot. But a lot of your students are going to like maybe more visual hands-on learning. So they're going to like the more where they're able to see and comprehend and then maybe connect with their body. Some of your students are going to really like the the tactile learning. Some of them are really going to want to mess around with their hands and maybe build things or break things down. And so just knowing your students and having those interests and kind of grouping them by those. Incorporating language, this is a great one. Science and is just lends itself, and so does these hands-on minds-on learning idea. It lends itself to allowing a bunch of different content areas to be infused in that. And so incorporating language is super important. I mean, you can incorporate that in just the directions, or you can incorporate that in a way for them to, okay, take what you've learned here and start putting them into words, or little things like that. Just allowing that language aspect to be there for them so that there are more connections to other content areas. And then just adjusting your expectations. This goes with the differentiated learning, which I'm a huge component of. It's just allowing students to have different expectations. You're going to have different levels. You're going to have students that really understand science or maybe just certain concepts of it, and they need some extra help. And that's totally going to come up in any classroom. I am still a pre-service teacher, but in my field experiences, in my practicum hours, I've seen this to be true. Some students really, really enjoy hands-on learning, and some students, it kind of scares them at first because they haven't been allowed that time to do hands-on, minds-on. And so I think that it's important to make sure you have different expectations and always put them high so that your students want to achieve at a high rate or at a high level. So all in all, that was a long 12 minutes, but those were just some of my thoughts and some experts and some researchers that have done extensive research on this idea of hands-on, minds-on learning, which is considered inquiry learning. If you're interested, I enjoyed researching and kind of figuring out a little bit more about it and just kind of some other people's take. So if you are interested, I definitely encourage you to go and search.